So welcome to another edition of TechBytes. And we're having a continuing conversation, because it's not the first one we had, with John Kelly, who's the Chief Revenue Officer of Mako Networks. And we started, John, a conversation actually with CC's Pizza, and we talked about their digital transformation. And it seemed like it was a pretty good subject, and now people are thinking about 2026. So it seems like a good time to continue the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. Lots of, the last quarter of the year is spent planning for what's coming next. And there's definitely a lot of different initiatives that people are looking at that touch technology. So, it's a good time to reconnect. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it seems like there's a hidden thing in here when we're talking about the planning of the quarter of the year. And when you're talking with somebody who's a key industry supplier, of course, that might be what sales can we close? What are we doing? But in reality, given your background and the conversation we had before, if we put our operator hat on, what is it that is now turning out to be the key things you're hearing people thinking about and planning for next year?
Yeah, we actually are doing this a lot at the moment. We have these quarterly kind of business reviews, and the ones at the end of the year tend to be the most interesting because it's when people are having that, kind of reflection period on what went well, what didn't go well, and what can we change, since the new year kind of gives them that impetus to do so. And a lot of the focus has been on, how do we standardize, how do we rationalize, how do we reduce sprawl, and then how do we achieve the specific goals that we have, from a business standpoint or a marketing standpoint, because marketing is so intertwined with technology these days. What do we want to achieve, and what technology needs do we have to facilitate that? So lots of really interesting things that we're hearing about. Some of the key topics are, this kind of shift back to the edge. Historically in retail, it was on-premise solutions were doing all the kind of heavy lifting with respect to, computing and all of that. Cloud came along and suddenly everything shifted into the cloud and you were pushing everything up there. And now it's shifting back to the edge because some of these new high bandwidth applications, video processing and all that sort of stuff, it's not very cost effective or time effective to send stuff up to the cloud and get it back to be able to make decisions at the edge. So what's happening at the edge and edge computing capabilities, AI acceleration, that's what we're starting to see more and more.
Are you saying that people are going over the edge?
Maybe.
Yeah. But actually, wait. It occurs to me, if we take a look at current events, do you think that people's attitudes and what they're thinking about changed when you had the major outage about 2-3 weeks ago, and all of a sudden they found out maybe their restaurants weren't running or whatever it was? Do you think that in the last 2 to 3 weeks had an impact on something?
I certainly think it brings awareness to the importance of resiliency, redundancy, not being single-threaded, eliminating potential points of failure. Obviously, that was an unfortunate outcome for many people, but it demonstrates the dependence and reliance that we have on many of these technology solutions that are out there. So it's certainly one of those things where even though people who weren't affected got away with it this time, they're thinking, well, how do we shore up our operations so it doesn't get us next time?
Well, it's sort of like when COVID hit, people who were not prepared to do online ordering and delivery all of a sudden overnight were getting prepared, right? But if I think about this, you said that you're doing your reviews and your end of year reviews as your clients are out there, and you started to talk about what worked, what didn't work. So you might have an interesting perspective to this. I always tell people that when the economy is good and businesses are doing good, they always look to investing in revenue generating. But when things are tight, they look at expense control.
Mm-hmm.
So how is 2025 turning out?
Well, I definitely think there's a lot of focus on expenses because there are various factors that are impacting people's cost structure that are beyond their control. So they're looking at what can we actually control and get our arms around and reduce that to the extent that's possible, because there are all these other variables swirling around that are going to hit them, whether they want to or not. And so we definitely have seen a focus on cost reduction, particularly around recurring costs. How do we consolidate subscription fees into single systems as opposed to having lots of different things where there's perhaps some overlap of functionality and all of that. How can we do the same or more with fewer people? How can we do it more reliably and more accurately? But yeah, definitely a shift on to cost reduction, cost control where possible, given the circumstances at the moment.
Well, when people are taking a look at security, they're looking at network management, it's fun because you're bringing up some subjects that are sort of like back to the future. You talked about coming back to the edge and what people are doing and how they went out, they come back in, they were on premise. The same thing goes with how they cost their systems as well. You just brought up reoccurring charges, and all these little things that are just biting at your ankle that are, just adding, and in a franchisor environment, adding up those operating expenses versus the capital expenditures and how they do it. Are they changing their spending on security and how they're looking at that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're definitely seeing people looking at how can I, either sort of operationalize expenses or just lump sum it up front and know what I've paid already, and then I can kind of amortize it out over time. There's definitely a lot of different. Obviously, businesses are going to have different models for how they prioritize that sort of thing, but I think the universal thing is that people are looking hard at their vendors. They're looking hard at how they pay their vendors and what they're getting back from their vendors in return for what they're spending. And so it's forcing vendors to really make sure that they're clear about the value that they're offering these retailers, and making sure that the delivery of the value is actually realized, because the pressure's on.
So does that change the way that Mako Networks goes and approaches them in how you package services, bundle, unbundle, how you sell? Is there a new trend coming forward given all these different changes?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is that people are a little sick of the nickel and diming, like you said, the nipping at the ankles type subscription fees. So, we tend to offer flexibility with respect to, whether you want to do a capex model or an opex model. We offer that one, all the time. But I think we're kind of seeing this shift towards an appetite for bundling services together and saying, how can I have fewer vendors that are bringing me more value, giving me what I really want, and getting it at a cost-effective rate because I'm, bundling stuff together with one as opposed to picking, lots of different ones and
Well,
having to
that was
negotiate.
that was really part of the conversation we had with CC's. We
Exactly.
were talking about how they were transforming digitally across what they were using, but also how they were bringing it all together.
Absolutely. It's not only, there's the standardization of technology that you benefit from just having a single system, and then a single support desk, and then, single billing, and all of this. It just makes it a lot easier. And then when you're bringing on a new franchisee, hey, this is what we do, and here's how we do it. Leave little to the imagination for some of these core critical pieces of the infrastructure, because you just want to have things that are plug and play, turnkey, and CC's is a great example of having
Right.
standardized that.
Well, let's talk about, just let's break this into maybe two areas, right? So we talked about, more and more applications that people are using, and it seems like these applications just come up every day. So are you seeing people really looking to spend more on specific siloed applications, or are they also going, an all-in-one holistic approach as they look at application bundling?
Well, it's a great question, and not to not answer it directly, but it's something that we have looked at very hard, and this is not a brand new trend. And what the way that we have been, addressing this in Mako is we try to serve as kind of a connectivity hub that facilitates connectivity to whatever the application is that you require. And so we've recently rolled out an ecosystem that we call the Makoverse, and it sounds all very
The
techy.
Mako verse.
The
Okay,
Makoverse,
the Mako verse.
and
I'm
it's a
trying to.
combination of, yeah. It sounds like you said Back to the Future a little bit, but essentially what it enables.
Is this issued during Shark Week or what?
Yeah, exactly.
I had to
Um,
find some way to tie this in, right?
Totally. But essentially, what the Makoverse enables is we have direct connections into the data centers that these critical third-party applications, that retailers use, payments, loyalty, gift cards, signage boards, whatever. But what this means for the actual retailer is that they can say, okay, if I've got Mako infrastructure installed from a networking standpoint, I can log into the Mako central management system and then activate or deactivate whatever services and applications I want to have at my store. So I want to use this payment processor, click, off you go, you're up and running. Yeah, I want to use this loyalty processor, click, off you go, you're up and running. What this means is that the operator has they have, first of all, one source of connectivity for everything. They can just kind of enable and disable as they choose. It gives them lots of flexibility and autonomy to make technology decisions
Right.
about what they want to have at their stores without having to say, okay, well, it's going to cost us an arm and a leg to get a VPN set up to this payment processor, and we got to have this, and we got to have that, and all this connectivity stuff. We've centralized all of that, and then by having these existing hardened connections, it's not on the operator to actually figure out where the data needs to
Does that
go.
mean at some point that Mako becomes the provider of those services and you just say, I've got a menu of things. Here are 10 different choices of payment processors. Pick the one because we have relationships with all of them. And you end up actually being the relationship manager between all these?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, that's sort of as we think about the long-term vision for where that could go. We'd love to serve as this kind of central coordinator for whatever it is from a technology standpoint you need to deploy at your store and make it as easy as possible. Because for us, I don't care if you're using this loyalty provider or that loyalty provider. I just want you to be using Mako, and if I can facilitate you making that decision easily, reliably, securely, that's my goal, to serve as that for you, so that you as the operator can make that decision that best suits your business and we can facilitate it.
Well, it also means that it's one less checkbox that they need to do, when they can go take a look at those established partnerships. But also, you have a certain responsibility here as being that central ecosystem connector that you need to make sure that they're following the security and everything, and they're following the standards. But you also want to make sure that the people on the other end are doing it.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of a way to provide almost sort of there's some level of gating, right, for both parties to know that there's credibility on both sides, and we can serve as that validation point. Yes,
Well, you want to keep them within the universe.
the
You don't want
makeover.
them going extraterrestrial or something like that outside the
Don't
universe.
don't want anything like that.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to figure out how this all fits together. But I mean, it's sort of challenging when you have all these different providers. But, in your universe, of the people that you're working with, one of the reasons they're going to come to you is that you're going to protect them. You're going to give them a certain standard in there. You're going to advise them. We had that conversation before, and help them to figure out proactively what it is that they need to do. Make it easier for them to expand their business and focus on the business and choose the right applications and do those things. So having you as the person who helps to be the trusted party in
Yeah.
that, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think, part of that is, I think what gives us credibility with that is the fact that our entire underlying technology system is PCI certified. That's an annual thing that we go through. It's extremely cumbersome for us to do, but we consider it a competitive advantage because the actual underlying technology is all put through this rigorous third party independent audit on an annual basis to
But
ensure
it
that it
means they don't have to do it,
makes sense.
right?
Exactly. There's still some
I mean, it's
element of
not their
PCI
business to
burden.
do that.
Yeah, it's always there's going to be some element of PCI burden on the operator always. You can't get around that, but we make it a lot easier to do that and a lot easier to establish these third-party connections securely and within PCI compliance as well.
I'd like to sort of revisit that though, because if you think about it, that's an awful lot of responsibility and trust that they're putting on you. To be very clear, right? They may choose the best supplier, the best functionality that works for them, but may not be exactly the most secure and whatever, but yet you want to drive your business, right? So how are you really protecting them or advising them or being their partner in those decisions as they look at them? Because there are too many choices and they come too quickly, and half the time these choices are driven by the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with respect to, sort of making sense of the different technology choices that are out there for an operator, we try to be heavily engaged through organizations like yours, which I think also serve as kind of a gating mechanism for what's real and what's not and all of that. But I think, just being as involved as we can with the industry, making sure that, when we are talking to our customers, anything that's kind of coming up that's new, we get a sense of what it's all about, and then even to be part of this Makoverse ecosystem or to be interfacing with us, there's a level of security parameters that are required from us in order to sustain that PCI compliant certification that's so important to us as a business. So I think that it all kind of fits together in that we can really provide the assurance of if you're working with us and we're working with another third party, there's independent
Absolutely.
that we could be trusted.
Well, look, I want to take a break for a minute here because I'd like to just sort of shift our conversation after the break into really what are those specific trends that you are seeing that we better highlight because they may have new and unique ways of looking at this that we didn't consider. I know in the last conversation we started to talk a little bit about connectivity within a store, and you got the equipment, you got everything else, but and that is part of the investment. So let's just take a quick break and then we'll come back and let's explore some very specific examples of how somebody might think of this heading into the new year.
Sounds
So I'm
great.
with John Kelly, the Chief Revenue Officer of Mako Networks, and we're having a conversation on connectivity, but we're actually strategizing, I think, on the new year. So we'll be right back.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
So welcome back, and we're on a TechBytes spotlight and a continuing actual conversation that we started with John Kelly, Chief Revenue Officer of Mako Networks, and we had this conversation a couple of months ago, and we actually were talking about CC's Pizza and the journey that they took. But John, you have a lot of experience out there, and you're talking to a lot of people. We talked about expense reduction. We talked about some of the new revenue strategies, but really, where is the focus that maybe we're not thinking about their impact on all of this as we go into next year? What is going to be the major investment in the technologies, and what needs to accompany that?
I'll tell you one that's kind of interesting that's really low-hanging fruit for retail operators is phone lines.
Phone lines.
Yeah, so the old, kind of POTS lines.
Okay, now I wouldn't have guessed that was going to
plain
come
old
up. So,
telephones.
okay.
Yep. So a few years ago, the FCC, I guess, changed some of the regulation around pricing of this stuff. And with the copper wiring that's required for the infrastructure, it's very expensive to maintain. And it was, I think, sort of limited in terms of what they could charge. But in the past few years, with that price control being lifted, prices have absolutely skyrocketed for plain old telephone service at locations. And so what this means is that people, in some cases, for a phone line at their retail store, which is often required for 911 and all this sort of stuff,
Right.
they could be paying upwards of $300 or $400 per month for a phone line. And so we see this massive opportunity for people who don't often think about their phone lines to make significant savings by switching over to a voice over IP.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask that question. Why are we even having this conversation about phone lines? I didn't realize that there were that many phone lines still out there.
There are a lot of phone lines still out there. It's kind of shocking.
But most of the phone line providers are doing voice over IP too, aren't they? Generally, the same people that are providing you with the rest.
You'd be surprised how long this technology continues to be out there, and there's a tremendous amount of money being spent on phone lines that you kind of wouldn't expect. And the reason for this, I think, is not necessarily through complete negligence of the operator or whatever, but you see in the restaurant and retail space, stores are bought and sold and they change hands and all this type of stuff, and in many cases they're ultimately owned and operated by some larger entity.
Right.
And so, there might be a phone bill that's hitting procurement, utilities, facilities, maintenance, store operations, and they're all paying a phone line. They don't even realize it. And so, the costs are actually quite high. Mako has a voice over IP service called Mako Voice. And what we often do with people when we're deploying this solution is we do what's called a site survey in advance and go out to the store, analyze what's going on. It's kind of like house cleaning a little bit. And in many cases, we're finding 4 or 5 phone lines that the operator didn't even realize were still active at the store that they're paying for. And
Are they even connected?
In some cases, they still are. In some cases, they're not. We actually had one situation recently where even though the phone line was there and they were paying for it, it wasn't actually connected. The phone terminated at a house down the street. So this retail store was paying for some, residence's phone line. It's all sorts of ridiculous stuff that you find when you go into the back rooms of these locations. But that's a really big opportunity. And I think a lot of people don't think about that as something that they can do to save money.
I wouldn't have thought about it. Okay,
Exactly.
so phone lines. So what else are we not thinking about?
Yeah, and then I think, and that's, CSIS is a great example of that. They've now consolidated in, their voice service as well within the networking. So yeah, there's lots of stuff like that. I think the other thing that we're seeing is all these, IoT, Internet of Things, has been a very big thing for a while now. And I think what we're seeing is this kind of all these point solutions. They all have, connectivity needs. And so every single one of them comes with built-in connectivity. Cell over here and mesh over here and this over there and whatever it may be. And so what we're seeing now is people are saying, hey, look, I got an awful lot of cellular coverage in my store through all these different devices that all have different SIMs that I'm paying for.
Right.
How do I start to consolidate this into one thing? And I think the reason why people did that initially with IoT is because they couldn't trust the store connectivity to be secure and reliable and easy to integrate with, which obviously is critical for getting an IoT application, up and running. And so they all went cellular. And so again, similar to phone lines, now there's all these cell devices that are out there. So there's connectivity pouring out of these stores, but you're paying for an awful lot of it. And so people are now, sort of restoring their trust in the on-site internet. And I think, solutions like, the one that we provide allows people to do that and say, okay, well, I'm going to now, take all these point solutions that are all on their own independent, connection and centralize the connectivity to one place.
So how do you protect them, against a single outage that comes that way? There's got to be a backup solution as well that may not be, just total internet based.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think, what it means is you have to centralize your, failover and redundancy. And so, one of the ways that we've done that is we've got dual SIM cell failover built into every firewall that we produce. And so,
just like you do with a home alarm system.
Exactly. So if the internet goes down into the store, it fails over to a SIM card. And if that one's for some reason not working, there's another backup one as well. And the other thing that's important about it is and this is something that our customers really value.
Do they pay for that, or is that through you?
That's all part of our service that we provide. And then the other thing that I think is important to highlight is that we have the capability to give people visibility through our management software into what's the signal strength on my SIM card before I fail over. Because what you don't want to have happen is, oh, great, I've got a SIM card in my firewall, but there turns out to be no signal at the store. And you learn that the hard way if your internet goes down and you fail over to what you think is a reliable cellular signal, but in fact, because it's stuffed in some back room or it's under a counter somewhere with, in a cinder block building, it's not getting any signal. It allows you to be proactive and say, hey, how can I leverage this, visibility into my equipment and the performance and the site health and the monitoring and all that to say, hey, maybe I need to move this thing somewhere else, or I need to reinforce connectivity with an external antenna, stuff like that. So you can kind of stay ahead of it and ensure you've got that failover.
But if the signal changes, are you monitoring that constantly to know that, maybe the antenna position stayed exactly where it is, but for some reason, something else, outside the store changed and all of a sudden the signal's just not there?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a monitoring alert system that provides that sort of notification. And in fact, an interesting example of this, I know that not every member of IFBTA has gas pumps. In fact, probably very few do. But I think it actually applies.
Are you going back to your Exxon days?
going back there, and also going back to many of our customers who are in the convenience store and retail
Oh,
fueling.
that's actually a place where you guys got started.
That's exactly right. But
Okay,
one
so we're
example,
talking about gas pumps.
we're talking about gas pumps. So one example that's interesting about the alerting that you were just talking about is we had a customer come up to us at a trade show last week, and the customer said, "Hey, I just got an alert. My cell overages are going crazy. Like, what's happening here?" And we had one of our sales engineers standing at the booth that day, and he pulled up his computer and he logged into the central management system, and he said, "Okay, what's the store?" And they logged into it and they looked at it. And what had happened is that the provider of the video media that's at the gas pump, the little
Right.
ads that play and all of this,
Yeah.
um, they previously were caching the data and then pushing it, on site locally to the pump in order to play it. And
And now
then
they're
they
doing live.
they pushed a firmware update and it was now streaming video content. And because the site had failed over to cellular, it was going through massive amounts of data to present that annoying little ad at the gas pump. But they got an alert very quickly and they were able to shut that down, because the other nice piece of the cellular failover stuff is that once the failover kicks in, the traffic is automatically reprioritized to the most critical stuff. So stuff like the media at the pump will get turned off, and the payment stuff will go to the top of the list, so that even if you've got restricted connectivity because you've gone to a failover, you're still getting the most important stuff out to
Well,
our
I don't
resale.
know. If I was the chief revenue officer of that gas company, I might want that media first because the gas is
Well,
going to stay steady, right? And the media is helping push the incremental sales or something like that, or the loyalty program. Wouldn't you think that? And of course, your answer is going to be it's in the Mako universe. I get, but the Makoverse. Um, but wouldn't you think when they had that spike, that should have shown up somewhere? That wouldn't necessarily mean the guy has to walk to your booth to find out.
well, right. He got it on his phone or whatever, and his team could have addressed it. But it was just an interesting example of reacting very quickly to an alert
But it
from the
is
field.
something you don't think about, right? So when you have all of these customers like you do, whether it's for one customer with thousands of locations or multiple customers, I remember we had this conversation of how you collect all this data, how you can use that in advance to start to spot those trends that are going to be out there, because maybe a lot of people would see the streaming going on or something like that, and they may not realize it individually, but you might realize it because you see it. What do these all have in common?
Yep, well, exactly. That's right. I mean, in this particular example, we actually then ended up pushing a statewide, prohibition on streaming that stuff when the thing's on self failover, so that people avoided that situation. But I think this actually ties a bit back to what we discussed earlier on what are people doing and thinking about as they turn into next year. A lot of the data that we do capture, a quarterly review, especially towards the tail end of the year, gives you the chance to say, okay, what did we notice? Because it's not all the time that you can go and do all this cleanup and housekeeping and so on and so
Right.
forth. And the end of the year is a good time to kind of do that. And so we often look at the trends and say, hey, where were we struggling with connectivity? Where were we struggling with, cellular coverage? And what can we do to improve that and make it more resilient and more reliable and those sorts of things, and improve the overall performance? Those are the sorts of patterns that we look for in the data when we do these customer reviews that
Right.
are.
Well, I know that you've brought up a couple times in the first half about AI, and of course, one of the things is the increased bandwidth, because the more stuff that's going through AI, that's one thing, and then the increased security because of where it's connecting to. But as I start to think about it, I remember you also talking about the first conversation we had about using AI yourselves to possibly point out some of these types of anomalies or observations. Are there some things through your own use of AI that have changed your business model itself?
Absolutely. We're kind of conducting a company wide evaluation of AI tools. It's interesting timing that you bring it up, because there are certainly things that we want our customers to be able to do. And our latest firewall, which we just launched a few weeks ago, actually, is the Mako 6700. It has an AI accelerator chip built into it at the edge, so that people who are processing video and want to use some of the new AI and video are very much kind of
Yeah, they're
coming
coming
together.
together.
Yep. In lots of different applications, loss prevention, shrinkage, all these sorts of security, whatever it may be. And so processing that video at the edge and then only sending the stuff that really matters off site is increasingly important to people. And so we have an AI chip built in so that our new firewall can enable that sort of thing. But I think what we're also seeing is it's not just about the hardware, it's about managing the data. And AI is very good at that. It's not very good at everything, but it's pretty good at managing through large amounts of data. And so we're building in some AI tools to our central management system so that rather than someone having to pull reports, analyze them, all this sort of stuff, they can say, hey, how many of my sites went on to self failover last month and for how long? Right. And then that allows them to troubleshoot, okay, well, and who's my ISP provider in those locations? So they can then go back and, they've got actionable stuff as opposed to just, report have to sift through. So those are some of the areas where we're kind of starting to explore how we can deploy AI to really make sense of these large swaths of information, because there's so much that you capture when you are the network. How do you make sense of it and turn it into something that's actionable at the site level for the actual operator?
Well, you're able to pin it down not only holistically, but because they have all these separate connections going through a single point, which was your earliest point, you're also able to look at the silos of each individual piece that's there. I think that there's a couple of things you've said. I like to try to pull these together. There is a bandwidth thing. I think that the video and the AI visioning that's out there, certainly is eating up a lot of bandwidth, but more and more people are using that for all kinds of things. Security, or looking at how many pepperonis are on pizza. I mean, or training or whatever. They're doing that, right? Then you also brought up all the connection points of the equipment that are all speaking to each other that were going out individually. And now if you start to consolidate them, besides the cost thing you were talking about with the individual SIMs and stuff, but now you're talking about bandwidth too. You're consolidating bandwidth into a single channel. Then you talk about the use of more and more data by the existing applications, and then you layer on top of it more applications, right? And so that all sort of comes together, I think, as a trend as well, that maybe, I don't know, is there some way that a person can forecast in advance that if they make these changes, what its impact is going to be on the equipment they need to control, the network, manage the network, the bandwidth? How do you have a forecasting tool or something that you bring out that looks at the Mako universe and helps them with that?
I think that's that's a little harder. It comes down to the individual application and knowledge. But I think having visibility into the data and having it in a way that you can manage and do something with is foundational to any of that, right? It's an area that we're looking at and getting more into analytics. We're more on kind of network analytics and performance than necessarily helping people actually make decisions about how they're doing what in their store.
But maybe because you're monitoring, maybe there's an industry service you can provide here, because you're monitoring, you are working with so many different systems out there, but there are only so many different systems. At least, if you take a look at the majority, the 80-20 rule or something like that on this, so that, 80% of the systems, are falling within this, that maybe you can start to spot trends in this type of POS, in this type of loyalty, in this type of, music, in this type of credit card, that when they check those boxes that you talked about earlier, where they pick what they want and just put it together, that you automatically know, if you check this box, this is going to be the increase in bandwidth and traffic that you should expect to get given the volume of your restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a it's a potentially valuable thing to say, if you have this combination of elements, this is the outcome that you could realistically expect. I think that would certainly be a valuable tool for an operator.
Well, there aren't going to be that many people that are going to know that as well as you are.
Yeah, well, let's hope not. We'll put it on the
Go
road.
that, right?
Yeah.
Hey, look, I see that as a revenue generation thing that you ought to take to the chief revenue officer.
I've written it down.
Yeah, you wrote it down. There you go. So what have we missed? Because we are sort of at the end of the year now, and is there anything that we've missed besides that? I got it, that phone lines are coming back. No, they're disappearing. You're paying for phone lines you don't need. Okay, I think that was the right message in there. Okay, got that one. I'll be talking about that for the next couple of weeks. But is there any other main things that you think just you want that last impression or somebody to think about as they go forward here?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in retail businesses out there around connectivity and networking. And what we often see is that people can stand up multiple different network stacks within a single store in the hopes of achieving, oh, we need a network over here to do this, a network over here to do that, a network over here to do this. And it becomes very, very confusing to manage, costly to manage, sprawling. I mean, all the things that come with it. And I think, really looking at a network consolidation opportunity is something that is worth doing if you are in retail today. We see it all over the place. I think CC's is a wonderful example of someone who decided to take a really hard look at it and consolidate it. And they've really seen huge value in terms of speed of deployment, ease of management, cost reduction, all that sort of stuff. And if you're deploying more than one network or more than one firewall in your locations, you should probably take a look at seeing if you can
I
consolidate
think
that.
there is a lesson there. It's not just the consolidation of it, but I don't think that people realize how many different silos they really have, and it is time because first of all, not only are they going to reduce expense, but all of these things actually really work together.
Yep.
And having all these individual channels don't make sense either, not just because of cost, but also because of the data and how things flow. And there's opportunity efficiency to be had.
Exactly, and I think that, and the last one is if you're just using an open internet connection at your store for connecting your point of sale or anything like that, and you haven't provided some kind of security on your network, you are really at risk. The number we talked about AI, really from the in-store application and what we're talking about here with monitoring your network, but the level of sophistication that hackers now have, they can spin up an AI tool that can go and seep into networks and conduct all sorts of automated phishing and this and that and whatever, and their ability to deploy these threats is exponentially more significant and more sophisticated than it was even just a couple of years ago. So if you're just using an open internet connection to connect your store, you should rethink about what you're doing and look.
And let me just add to that with some personal experience in that, I use a global accounting system, for the IFBTA, and that global accounting system now has a direct native interface with both Claude and with ChatGPT. Well, if I'm really exposing my internal financials, HR, and everything to that in order to get support, who's to say, that I'm now actually opening up very sensitive systems internally. And I
Absolutely.
think because AI is being embedded in everything, that's going to be probably one of the big
Well,
risks and challenges of the future.
absolutely. We've just recently launched an AI policy internally for what are approved applications, what is not, what can be shared, with an AI tool and all of this. You really need to, you don't know what you don't know with this stuff because it's all so fresh and so new.
Right.
You need to protect yourself to the extent possible. And for someone like us who prioritizes security above almost all else, we need to be very, very serious about how we get involved in this.
Well, listen, I think that that's a good parting comment on there, especially as people finish up the year and the conversation still seems to be AI, but it seems to be that 26 is the year of embedded AI. And, we have to be thinking of that. So, John, it's a real pleasure. John Kelly, the Chief Revenue Officer at Mako Networks. It's a real pleasure to have you back on TechBytes and working with the IFBTA again. And what we needed to do was a round two because it's such an important subject as we go into the new year. And I just appreciate your continuing to support the industry, support us, and continue to have the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate what you do in the IFBTA. And yeah, it's great to be a part of it. We're looking forward to continuing the relationship.